How's it going, Metroid fans? So now I've had a couple days to really sit and ponder everything that happened in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. So I'm ready to give my spoiler review, and let me just say real quickly, I'm going to have to assume that many of you already saw the non-spoiler review, so I'm going to avoid certain topics not to sound too redundant. But let's go ahead and get into the game. So immediately, on Tanamar, you can't help but notice how freaking good this game looks. That was the first thing I noticed when I started playing. It just looked so gorgeous. I was playing on the 4K setting. I actually haven't played yet on the 120 frames setting yet. So if you've played both and you have an opinion on which one looks better, please let me know in the comment section below. But Samus is flying in, atmosphere looks gorgeous, and although we had already seen the entire first level from the Treehouse session and many people got to play the demo, I gotta say, still, getting my hands on the game as someone who went through Prime 1, Prime 2, and Prime 3 many times before, this section of the game felt like classic Metroid Prime, and it looked so freaking good. And so I was in my happy place at this point in the game, and I actually was for quite a while after this. Some people were saying the combat and gameplay didn't age all that well and was very dated. And honestly, that never bothered me in the slightest. In fact, I really loved it. If you loved the Metroid Prime trilogy, then you're probably going to want it to feel just like the Metroid Prime trilogy. And from a gameplay standpoint, that's exactly what they did, and it made me absurdly happy. Not everything has to have the most complex gameplay and all that. The one thing I might have liked to have had was some sort of counter or some sort of melee aspect for Samus, seeing that they've integrated that now into Samus Returns and into Metroid Dread, and that's really made for some smoother gameplay. There was a few instances where I really got close up with a space pirate or some kind of enemy, and I really just wanted to have some sort of counter or melee. But other than that, everything was just perfect. Then obviously we got to the first confrontation between Samus and Sylux. And Sylux ends up shooting the artifact, which, by the way, what the heck is this artifact? As far as I know, we never actually get any explanation for it. Like, how did the Federation even get it? Where did it come from? Who made it? As far as I can tell, it's just a major plot device. Like, they introduced it to the game just so Samus can get from point A to point B, and we can start advancing the plot. I'll get into this more later, but the fact that we have so many unanswered questions leads me to believe that this game is really setting up its own sequel, and maybe even its own trilogy. Once I point out all of the evidence, maybe you'll even believe that along with me. I also thought it was hilarious that Samus got her physical amnesia, as Metroid Dread called it, from getting teleported to Vuros. You know, her physical amnesia is whenever she's starting out in a game and Samus loses all of her abilities, like her missile launcher, morph ball bomb, all that sort of thing. As time goes on, it seems like it takes less and less for this woman to lose all of her powers to start a game. So yeah, it's just getting really funny at this point. Now this was the part where the game really started getting good to me. Chrono Tower was incredible. It's so ethereal, so angelic, but it's also eerie and unsettling. The music has this perfect sci-fi sound to it. It really had me questioning as I was going through it if the Lamorn were actually good guys or just evil creatures with some big elaborate trap for Samus. Then you get to Samus's first interaction with the Lamorn, and all I gotta say is, how good is this freaking music? My goodness, if there's one aspect of this game that is in the argument for the best of all of the Prime games, then it's definitely the music. My only complaint is that there were some parts where I wish we had more music. Like obviously the Soul Valley Desert for all the non-amiibo people, and much later on in the Great Mines. But overall, there was some truly good stuff in this game. Now I absolutely loved Fury Green. The music, the atmosphere, it's all classic Metroid Prime. And you can tell a lot of time and passion was put into this section of the game with its gorgeous environment and its epic landscape shots. Honestly, up until this point, I just had a stupid grin on my face, and I looked at my wife and I said, I can't believe I'm playing Metroid Prime 4. For me, the game was pretty much S tier up till this point. Then we get to Mackenzie. Again, I didn't hate him as much as a lot of people did. I'd rather have him not be there than be there, but I didn't totally loathe him. To me, he was just a trope of a nerdy technician. and I knew he wasn't going to be with me the entire game based on what people had said who had played it before in the reviews. So I didn't let his presence bother me all that much. I was pretty bummed though when he did end up becoming the voice of the hint system. I really miss the old version from the first Prime 2 games. I think having an actual person as your hint system really hurts the feeling of immersion and isolation, especially with how often he chimed in. It felt like the game was afraid of me going in the wrong direction for like 2 seconds, which is crazy to me, especially in a Metroid game. For me, temporarily getting lost is just part of the Metroid experience. Then we get to the desert, and again, I did not hate this place, but I'm also known for absolutely loving the Great Sea in Wind Waker. So maybe I'm just not the best person to ask about big empty spaces. The green crystals didn't bother me all that much either, but I was paying attention to the game from the beginning, and I was actively accumulating them as I went because I was told to. For those who didn't do that, I get why it was frustrating to collect so much at the end, but again, I'm the Wind Waker Ocean guy who loves traversing this stuff, so take it with a major grain of salt. Then we get to Volt Forge, and man, this was the best part of the game in my opinion. As far as I'm concerned, if you don't like this area, then you probably don't like Metroid Prime games all that much. The atmosphere, the music, the tight quarters, this was all just peak Metroid Prime. This is also one of the only sections in the game where you're never playing alongside of an NPC, so it's no surprise how immersive this section was. Plus you're rarely able to make contact with Mackenzie while you're here, which also helped with the feeling of isolation. I just freaking loved that when I turned the power on, all of the music and the lighting suddenly turns into Club Metroid. The way the motorcycles were built into the lore was also pretty cool, although it is weird picturing a Lamorne riding one of these things. Heading into this game, I was pretty neutral about the bike, but this section and build up to acquire Viola was what really sold me on it. I think it worked decently well for Metroid Prime, especially considering how they built it into the lore. But you will never, ever convince me that a motorcycle was the right thing for Zelda, but that's a whole nother discussion. Then you get to the training section, and again, this was fun as heck with its Tron-type vibes and its incredible music. I know, I won't shut up about the music, but the soundtrack in this game is seriously killer. Again, up to this point, I had very few complaints about this game. Honestly, Ice Belt was pretty awesome as well. I just wish they had leaned a little bit more into the horror of that area in a similar way to the Metroid Laboratory in Prime 3. Although I'd rather have no NPC interactions at all, Tokabi was the one I really liked. He felt like an actual soldier, and he reminded me of some of the Federation interactions in Metroid Prime 3. Honestly, if most of the NPC soldiers had the same grittiness and believability as Tokabi, and less of the campiness, I bet this game would have been received much better by the general audience. But it's after this point where things take a major turn for the worse, in my opinion. But in those first few hours, man, I was hooked. Like I was all in. I was ready for this to be on par with the other Metroid games. Whenever they tackle Metroid Prime 5, I do hope they try to mimic more of the first half of this game rather than the second half. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, I really think they tried to Zelda-fy this Metroid game in some ways, which some people actually argued against in that last video. For me though, it's obvious. There's literal shrines in this game sprinkled all over the map. Now there isn't a ton of them, but they're there, and they're pretty essential. You literally enter the shrines by going underground, by solving puzzles, then within each shrine is one hidden extra secret, just like one hidden extra treasure in every shrine in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Then when you get to the end of the shrine, you're met by a sage-like figure who gives you your reward, and then afterwards you're warped outside right where you started. It's basically a straight-up copy of Breath of the Wild's formula. Now as far as the desert, that hub is definitely more reminiscent of Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, but still, the Zelda vibes are certainly noticeable in this game. I could keep breaking down stuff step by step, but since we're moving on to more of the negatives, I'm gonna now try to cover stuff with more of a broad stroke. Flare Pool just felt a little bit stale to me, almost like a discount Magmore Caverns. It didn't help that the most annoying NPCs are there. I'm not a fan of a character like Mackenzie being in Metroid, but I gotta say, Armstrong's fangirling over Samus was way, way worse. And as much as Duke wants to act like a tough guy, he keeps making references to regular everyday stuff like casserole and red velvet cake. Like, like what are we doing? Are you gonna start going on about your Twitter mentions? In order for me to get truly immersed in this sci-fi world, I need to feel like I'm in another timeline in a galaxy far, far away. And every time someone makes a reference or has vernacular that sounds like something from 21st century Earth, it just kills the immersion. And that shouldn't be a hotly debated concept. That just seems obvious to me. For those of you who watched my spoiler-free video, this was the part where I had to mute the NPCs, because I just couldn't bear it anymore. Now I will say this, if you didn't grow up playing Metroid games, then you'll probably find the NPCs to be less annoying. But many of us who adored Prime 1, Prime 2, and Prime 3, the dialogue is genuinely off-putting. Like there was some of that in Prime 3, but nowhere near to this extent, and it certainly wasn't this campy. From this point on, the game is basically Samus and friends. I really didn't like the Great Minds at all. Honestly, it felt like this part of the game was either lazily done or insanely rushed. There is basically none of the signature backtracking and level design of your typical Metroid game. It's pretty much one very long tunnel of linearity that you never return to. There's only ambient sounds and no real music. That might seem cool to some, but then they introduce the Griever shrieking music every time they spawn. And this freaking carries over to Fury Green and other parts of Euros. This was annoying as heck, but it also reminded me of the Chozo Ghost from Prime 1, so at least it has some company in terms of constant annoyances. Now the NPCs were bad, and I really didn't enjoy them in this game. But the worst part of this game was its story, partially because of how high the bar was set from the story of the original trilogy. So let me get this straight. The Lemorn are essentially begging Samus to save them from their own screw-up of sprinkling green energy rain on everyone, which made all but 13 of their people completely demented. I have so many questions about this that never get answered. On top of this, Samus never even saves them, which is part of what makes me think that this is building to either another sequel or a trilogy altogether. Because literally at the end of the game, we see Samus receive a message from the Lemorn, where the Lemorn wishes that Samus could have saved them, which then deeply saddens Samus because she couldn't achieve that, and even the NPC characters acknowledge the fact that Samus is hurt by this. So the truth of the matter is that either Samus failed in her mission in Prime 4, which is super depressing, or this story isn't done yet. Sure, she kinda preserves their memories in the end, but 99% of the Lemorn are still Grievers, which clearly haunted the remaining Lemorn, and the entire Ice Belt section was about them trying to save them. So yeah, there's either more coming in Metroid Prime 4, or this story is just awful and unsatisfactory. And then there's Sylux. We see hardly anything from him in this game. We can't scan him for info until the very end, and we discover in a bonus scene after beating the game that he essentially hates Samus for no good reason. His boneheaded plan of stealing the massive space pirate weapon backfired and got his troops killed. I love the idea of him being a former Federation trooper, and this shot is one of the coolest cutscenes that I've ever seen in a Metroid game. But at the very least, make his backstory a little bit more believable and maybe even more relatable. Also, how did he figure out how to make these Metroids into fusion Metroids? And why is he so damn powerful? Like Samus is a literal superhuman with Chozo DNA and with a Chozo battlesuit. But Sylux? He's just a guy. The final battle in space is awesome from a gameplay standpoint, but I laughed to myself when I realized this Dragon Ball Z battle is just with some regular dude from the Federation. Again, it would be easy for me to disregard all of this as some generic video game story, if it wasn't a Metroid Prime game. The story and lore of the first 3 games is so freaking good. Every detail mattered, everything had an elaborate story, and no stone was left unturned. This was nothing like that, and I kept waiting until the very end of the game for all the details to start coming together with a massive lore dump, but it just never happened. Then at the very end, not only did Samus fail to save the Lemorne, but she failed to kill Sylux. So all the troopers had to sacrifice themselves instead. And to my shock, Samus actually goes along with it, because apparently getting back home for Samus is more important than destroying Sylux and saving her friends. I was watching people streaming it on YouTube, and I noticed that a lot of people died at this section because they didn't want to press the button, assuming that there was some way where Samus could be the hero. But no, we're just meant to leave them behind. As a longtime Metroid fan who knows quite a bit about the lore, this felt so insanely out of character for the altruistic Samus. This is the same Samus who stood up to the Chozo who raised her for the way they treated innocent life. This is the same Samus who rebelled against the Galactic Federation in an attempt to protect others. And I'm supposed to believe that she just dips on the entire group, leaving them to be alone with Sylux? Again, this is why I think these stories can't be completely over, because there's just too much that doesn't make sense and that doesn't really sit well. Although, the after credits scene is truly beautiful and really put me in my feels. Overall, I don't think it's a bad game. I just don't think it's up to the standards of the previous three in terms of immersion and storytelling, which naturally makes it a very disappointing installment for me, because the bar was set so astronomically high. I'm kinda hoping Metroid Prime 5 returns to the isolating feels of Prime 1 and Prime 2. But if there's any hope of salvaging the story for Prime 4, then we gotta hope that it's gonna elaborate on the Lemorne, the artifact, the green energy, and Sylux. But only time will tell. Now people are acting like we have to wait another 18 years, but remember, development started 8 years ago, and then it was scrapped and restarted, and over its development, it had to adapt to a next-gen console. Now, we have Retro's team already intact, and they can now simply reuse these assets for Metroid Prime 5 on the Switch 2. So I don't think it's necessarily all that far off. But again, just like I said in my last video, it doesn't make you a fake fan or a real fan, all depending on whether or not you like this game. This was just a very different Metroid game. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan, but if you're a fan of it, I'm happy for you, and please, let me know why in the comment section below. Did you love or hate Metroid Prime 4? I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more Metroid content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.